Right, back live with you tonight. Let's continue then with that conversation. South African Federation of Trade Unions has meanwhile slammed the Higher Education Department for failing to spend close to R500 million, which has since returned to Treasury. Saftu spokesperson Trevor Shaku joins us now for their reaction. Trevor, good evening. Good to have you.
Good evening, Tabo, and thanks for having us.
Well, we got some context now from the CFO to say that amount has got to be broken down into 2 financial years. 462 million would have been the 2022-2023 financial year, and only 117 million is the 2023-2024 financial year. And he's saying, if you look at that quantum in the context of, for example, having 130 billion rands, their spend has been 99.9%. It's just a mere figure of the quantum that they're dealing with. Hence, you would see over an amount of 117 million rands that has not been spent. And purely that would be attributed to vacancies.
Thanks, Tabo, for having us. Look, one, we think that it is irresponsible. Despite his explanation, we think it is irresponsible for the Department of Higher Education to return money which was given to them to spend in certain projects. And we know that the spending requirements and the areas of need in higher education are on a number of levels. One, it is, of course, in the context of staff establishment for the higher education, including the universities, including the DHET colleges and the community education colleges. Number two, there is a serious lack of infrastructure in the context of the existing universities themselves to replenish the existing infrastructure, but also to expand the infrastructure to meet the demands of population or student growth in those particular universities. And as we have demonstrated in our statement, there has been a serious number of growth of students who are leaving matric into the higher education sector, into post-schooling sector. But the investments in expanding these institutions to ensure that there is enough space for these students to be able to enroll are not actually built. And it is for this reason that one of the issues which we are currently lamenting is around the area of the lack of infrastructure expansion, which could actually provide for the growing number of students who are enrolling with these universities or prospective students who want to enroll with these universities. The third area of spending is, of course, equipment. And we know that equipment is very important. I mean, if you go to the DHET sector, you realize that there's a need for the replenishment, maintenance of the equipment they are using. I mean, just if you look at their computer labs, there are fewer computers and desks in those computer labs to be able to cater for the students who are attending, either for day classes or night classes. And this is a serious problem, Tabo, because if people come here and want to justify why they've returned money which was allocated to them, it is, in our view, not just irresponsibility, but actually highlights parts of mismanagement. And such mismanagement cannot be justified by anything.
Well, I mean, they argue that as far as procurements of goods and services, they're actually doing well there. I mean, if you look at what we heard on goods and services, it's only 30,000 rands worth of underspending there. As far as that aspect of things is concerned, they have 100% spent money on the procurement of goods and services, which then maybe would take the conversation to a different level to say, are they budgeting enough for goods and services? And maybe they should be gunning for more allocation, which they currently don't have.
Indeed. Remember, the Treasury only serves to give them the money. They are the ones who allocate money to their very spending priorities. So it can't be that you still have, for instance, colleges and TVETs, colleges which do not have photocopy machines, printers sometimes do not have papers, and in many instances I've mentioned that their computer labs have fewer computers for students who want to operate them. And in addition to that, there's lack of textbooks and all of that. If you have already problems of shortage of goods, which I've mentioned, you can't be telling us that you have spent 100% on the procurement of goods. Why are you not reprioritizing those particular funds? Because in the first place, you are in charge 100% of the allocation of spending according to the priorities of such particular institutions. So we do not accept such particular
But
explanation.
it could be argued that those posts are critical. You can't then just reprioritize what happens to those posts, because those posts have got to be accounted for.
Of course, but remember, the accounting would have to take place from within the department itself, because Treasury only says, take this money, and you, as the department, determine how you're going to spend it. Now, who are you going to be accounting to? You're going to be accounting to yourselves. So there's no justification here, Tao. And for instance, if we look at the enrollment of students in these institutions, both colleges and universities, and look at the staff establishment, the research which was published at Stellenbosch in 2022 showed that there was the rate of the enrollment of students was 2.9, whereas the rate of the employment of full-time lecturers was at 1.9. There is a mismatch in that. This on its own demonstrates that there is a need, of course, for them to be able to not only fill the vacant posts that they may have, but to expand the staff establishment to ensure that the increased population of students is catered with the corresponding number of educators, but also with administrators, because educators cannot be understood, or rather a university or a college, such particular institutions cannot be understood merely in the employment of core workers, which will be those people who impart knowledge to students. But it has to go in tandem with the hiring of security, the expansion of infrastructure, but also the hiring of admin staff and many other people who play various roles in those particular institutions. So we are saying to them that they have no justifications whatsoever to really justify why they are underspending, especially at the time when higher education institutions are actually in crisis. In crisis, as I've mentioned, of lack of photocopy machines, of photocopy papers, of computers. And when you look at that and compare it again with the fact that there is just infrastructure backlog in these many institutions, which actually is one of the reasons why you see and experience academic exclusions at the beginning of the year. You can't come to us and tell us and justify why you have failed to spend the money which was allocated to you. There's a need for these institutions to be able to utilize those particular funds which have been returned to Treasury to replenish a number of spending areas. And I've mentioned those spending areas. Now, it can't be that the department then comes merely to justify that they did not spend and da-da-da. We can't accept that.
Let's talk then about that particular challenge of filling vacancies. Is there something that needs to be reviewed there in how that process is followed? Because the incoming minister has told them, look, prioritize this thing. They say, we identify, we prioritize. There are delays, for example, when it comes to the selection and the recruitment processes, which are processes that might not necessarily fall within the department itself, would fall within the institutions, I suppose, who need to do the selection.
Sure, and I don't even understand what delays these institutions to fill vacancies in those various campuses of theirs, because a recruitment and selection process ought to be a simplest process, in my view. You receive applications, you sift, after sifting, you shortlist, after shortlisting, you interview and appoint. Now, of course, there might be factional power battles that take place in these institutions, and we've seen them in various institutions where appointments are contested because certain individuals wanted a particular individual to fill such particular posts. But for us, that should not be a main issue in the main. What ought to be done here is that the money ought to be allocated, and these institutions have the responsibility to ensure that they fill the vacant posts. They need to fill these vacant posts in order to be able to meet the rate and the ratio of the lecturers to students who are enrolling, of the security personnel to students who are enrolling, of the general workers to students who are enrolling, but also generally of the admin staff to students and even to the lecturers who are being employed in those particular institutions. Now, we think that the issue here should not even be an issue around reprioritization of funds from one spending area to another, for instance, from infrastructure to filling of vacant posts, because we think that all of the spending items that institutions have to spend on are quite critical. And I've highlighted already here that the lack of infrastructure, in fact, is perpetuating the impediments which have been created by historical legacies of apartheid, in which the black majority was barred from accessing some of these institutions. Now, underspending in these institutions means that infrastructure that is not expanded continues to become impediment, creating academic exclusions, because there would be, for instance, 209,000 posts or rather spaces for first-year enrollments, but there would have been 405 million applications which have been received, for instance, by the 23 top universities in the country. That on its own shows you that there is a chronic lack of space for the enrollment of students, and therefore these spending priorities have to be prioritized. And we think that it does not have to actually be okay as a matter of shifting a certain portion of money from one spending item to another. And this we have lamented when we quite often challenge fiscal austerity, because the issue is not only about prioritizing or reprioritizing funds from one spending item to another. We think that the Treasury actually has to increase more money in this department, especially, let's say, in this case, higher education department. It has to increase that money so that there would be enough money to spend on infrastructure, to spend on the procurement of goods, equipment, papers, and others, but also to spend on the expansion of the staff establishment, because the expansion of the fiscal infrastructure cannot go alone without the expansion of the staff establishment and, of course, of procurement of equipment. These are spending items that are necessary to ensure that the universities are able to deliver their core business, which is, of course, to teach, but also to do research. Now, the idea that they are not able to fill posts because there are problems in the selection process is just an excuse to the mismanagement and irresponsibility of the leadership of this department.
Trevor Shaku, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Trevor there, speaking on behalf of Saftu. Underspending seen as a weakness, according to Trevor, in management. This process being mismanaged at government policy level. What is it that needs to be reviewed in how the annual budgets are allocated and spent? You can weigh in tonight, 072-110-5584. Drop us an X at Newzroom 405.